Now I'd like to introduce your president, Mr. Guy Smith.
We've been hearing, not through obviously Canadian media or anything, but just because we know what's going on in the world, that something very serious was happening specifically in Wisconsin at the time.
I'm not on the formal agenda, but you know, they said I could just jump in anywhere. So, and I'm not just going to talk about stuff. It's important. It's really important, this issue I want to bring up with you.
It was 11:15 on a Sunday night because I was laying in bed and my phone rang, and at that time I usually don't answer it, but I picked it up and I looked at the phone and I saw who it was, so I figured I should answer it because if the president was calling 11:15 on a Sunday night, it could be something important.
It's really important, this issue I want to bring up with you, and I want to kick it off by actually showing a video. David, if that's ready, please.
I received a call from President Smith asking if I had a passport and if I was willing to go to Wisconsin.
Earlier today in Madison, Wisconsin, where thousands have taken to the state capitol to protest a new bill being offered by Republican Governor Scott Walker, which would radically redefine the collective bargaining rights of the public workers in that state.
I was at work when I got a call in the afternoon from the communications director who was out of town, and he asked me if I had my passport. I said I did. He said, well, that's good because you're going to be going to Wisconsin in the next few days. Can you do that? Can you just take off on a moment's notice?
Well, there was no phone call involved because I was at labor school, as Guy was actually.
So why should this matter to us here in Alberta? You know, the progressive province of Alberta.
No, I'd never been to Wisconsin.
Wisconsin was basically a blank slate to me. I didn't really know much about it.
Well, my initial image whenever I hear Wisconsin is I think of Fonzie.
As you're watching this unfold, you maybe think to yourself, why does Wisconsin matter?
Like here in the States, the public sector unions are the resistance, if you like, to right-wing governments. They are the groups that stand up and take it to the streets and get public involvement.
I want to take a moment to lay out why I think the stakes here are so high, why this is the biggest domestic political story in quite some time.
So why should this matter to us here in Alberta? You know, the progressive province of Alberta. The progressive province of Alberta. Why should this matter to us here?
One day in the very near future, it's possible we will wake up to discover that American unions no longer exist.
In Wisconsin, these brave workers have been engaged in this struggle right now as we speak. They're occupying the state assembly, the building there that you saw. And in fact, the governor, the wonderful Scott Walker, ordered the police to drag those protesters out. The police refused. The police joined them.
This isn't some idle dystopic vision. It could be right around the corner. Private sector unions have been battered by decades of union busting and sustained assault, leaving public sector unions as the most robust part of the labor movement.
Governor Walker today started welding shut the windows to that building to prevent those protesters inside being fed.
They represent the last true bulwark of the American labor movement. They are standing with their heels hanging over a precipice, and in Wisconsin, Governor Walker is attempting to give a swift final shove.
Can you imagine this? In the US of A, the bastion of democracy and rights, this is what the right wing are trying to do across the world, and we're seeing it right on our doorstep down south.
If that happens, it will be repeated from state to state, and that awful day without unions will be upon us.
We have to show solidarity with those workers in Wisconsin because the border does not exist. When you're a worker, there are no borders. The things that bind you are the bonds of solidarity, and they cross all borders.
It will be repeated from state to state, and that awful day without unions will be upon us. And when that happens, we will have lost one of the great forces of justice, equality, and dignity this nation has ever known. One of the great civilizing institutions in human history. Gone. Lost. Like Atlantis. A drowned, distant memory.
So what we plan to do, we have been in contact with the labor leaders in Wisconsin. We said, what can we do to help? How can we help you? Because we know if you don't win this fight down there, we'll be facing the same fight here. We find ourselves on the front lines of struggle here in Alberta every day. But I tell you, the front lines of the struggle in Wisconsin are going to determine what our future looks like. AUPE wants to be there on their front lines, as I am going to be sending Vice President Glenn Scott, Chair of the Committee on Political Action, to Wisconsin, along with an organizer from AUPE, as well as a communications officer from AUPE, to be there to show support for them and report back to us how they got organized, what they did, and how they appreciated our solidarity. So that's a commitment we're making to them.
Well, the highlights or the lowlights of the bill, the scary parts of it that would absolutely bust the unions down there, were that this legislation included provisions whereby unions would no longer be able to negotiate beyond salary increases. That means all those important things that are in collective agreements that workers have fought hard for over many, many years to get into their collective agreements, such as working conditions and health and safety and that sort of thing, the unions would no longer be able to negotiate those. And they would be restricted to only negotiating salary increases up to the rate of inflation. Anything beyond that would go to a public plebiscite. Unions would also have to recertify every single year. That means that the union would have to get indication from its members that the majority of them still wanted to belong to the union. The employer would no longer be able to collect dues on behalf of the union. That means that the union would individually have to approach members to collect dues from them on a monthly basis or an ongoing basis. And also there was increases to the benefits and the pension plans that workers would be responsible for having to pay, resulting in about an 8% pay cut for those workers. But at the end of the day, it was about, when you put all that together, it's about busting the union. As the executive of AUPE, we thought it was important to not only show direct solidarity with workers in Wisconsin, but also to learn from that experience, because the one thing that we needed to get out of our involvement is what can we do to prevent the similar situation happening here. So very quickly we put together a plan whereby we would send a Vice President, Glenn Scott, down there to represent AUPE, to show that physical presence of solidarity with workers down there. And we also sent Andrew Hannon from our communications department and Trevor Zimmerman from our organizing department to basically learn and glean whatever they could in terms of strategies, in terms of the experience that workers were going through there, to bring back that information for us so we can learn from it. AFSCME being the major union that was under attack there, AUPE can see the bonds of solidarity between us and them, because they are us in the States. In Wisconsin, the AUP equivalent is AFSCME. So they represent workers just the same as we do, exactly the same kind of workers. So I mean, automatically we felt that sense of solidarity with those workers and the need to support them.
Well, we didn't know exactly what to expect as we were heading down. We knew they were organizing for a large protest on Saturday, and that was to be the focal point.
Well, obviously we had goals to go down there. We were told we were going to collect information, we were going to observe, we were going to research.
I was specifically told that my purpose for going down there was to talk to some of the rank and file people, the people on the street, why they were there, and get an idea of how they could build such a strong movement in support of the public sector, and then also talk to some of the labor leaders there and find out exactly how they were working and what strategies they were using to get their message out to the people.
I was looking forward to meeting the folks in AFSCME that we had made connections with, and speaking with people who were on the streets taking part in the action, finding out what they were thinking about all of this, what it meant to them, and learning from that and taking that back to Alberta.
Well, it had been a very long flight to get there. I had to take several planes to get to Wisconsin. When we finally arrived in the evening, it was quite late. I think it was around 10 o'clock.
I was excited. I was a little apprehensive. I mean, when we got into the airport, you get there in the dark, and it's, you're in a different town. And what we did is we jumped in a cab, and we started heading towards the hotel.
And the cab driver told us that there was chaos in the streets. And I knew there was protesting going on almost 24/7, and I didn't think much of that. And I said, well, chaos, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, they've passed the bill today. They've stripped the monetary items from the bill. The quorum requirement isn't there, and they passed it without the Democrats being there.
Under Wisconsin law, they need 3/5 of all senators to be present if they're going to be voting on any financial measures.
The budget repair bill, as it was called, was introduced by Scott Walker and the Republicans to make major budget cuts as well as strip unions of their collective bargaining rights. And budgetary items need to be passed by a quorum in the Senate, which required 20 senators to be in appearance, and there were only 19 Republican senators in that Senate. After the occupation in the legislature, the Democrats were inspired to leave the state and stay in hiding so that the bill could not be passed as it existed.
Walker, in his desperation to try and get this bill passed, had changed the format in which it was presented so that he no longer needed that quorum that he needed when it was attached to a financial bill, that he removed that. So it showed, to me, that what that showed me was it wasn't about a financial bill. It was purely about busting unions, because all of a sudden then that's all that got passed.
Well, when you get there and you get in the cab and you just arrived in Madison, and you hear that from the cab driver, it was, it was a little bit like, oh, we were too late. We missed it, or there was a little bit of disappointment. But once we got to the Capitol building, I don't think the mood was of defeat. I didn't get that sense when we were at the Capitol building. I think it was just agitating. It had agitated people more. That's one of the things that I really liked about what happened, or still is happening in Wisconsin, is a lot of people would have packed up and gone home and said, you know what, we did our best, but it's over. And they didn't. They kept it up. They kept it up. And there was some pins out there. One day longer, and that's what it was all about. I think, is continuing the momentum one day longer. There was a lot of activity out around the square. There was people on the streets. There was the sound of this is what democracy sounds like. People kept tapping that on their horn the whole time we were there. It was kind of neat.
We went into the building, which was still open, and we found the place was full of protesters in there. A lot of students were there. They were occupying the building. They were not going to leave, despite what had happened earlier that day.
I don't know, there was probably, I'm going to say, a few thousand people in the building on 3 levels. It's similar to the legislature, with the rotunda and the 3 levels. And there was signs lining all the railings, and there was people all the way up to the top, and people all over the building, and they had free range of the building. We even ran into, there was an information booth on the main floor, and we were wandering around. There was a lady there that was serving pop and water and peanut butter sandwiches to just to the occupiers, I call them, and we asked her, what union are you with, or what organization? And she was actually a private citizen that had no ties to any organization, and she was there more just because, as a citizen, she thought what the government was doing was bad, unfair, bad for the state, and just unjust. It was pretty overwhelming, the amount of people that were there, and of course, not being in the building. I had never been in the building before. We just kind of took everything in from that main level, and there was some people getting up and speaking, and people were definitely listening. So I thought it was an opportunity to let people know that AUPE was there and why we were there, and that we supported them, and that the rest of the world was watching.
I've been listening to people talk about how the world is watching. I just want to let you know that myself, I'm one of the vice presidents of a large public service union in Alberta, Canada, the largest one. We traveled this evening. We took us 2 planes to get here, and we're going to be here for a few days because the world is watching what's going on here. The whole world.
He got up there and he just spoke off the cuff, and he just wanted to tell everyone that Canadians are watching you. The Alberta Union of Provincial Employees is there in support for you.
The place erupted. It was just fantastic to see the response. They were hugging Glenn. You'll see this, that they started chanting "thank you" after he finished speaking, and it was just a great experience.
It was really moving. I got to say, I had a lump in my throat just realizing how welcome we were.
But I think that they appreciated the fact that people from other countries and other parts of the country were watching and paying attention, and obviously also were concerned and thought that this was a bad thing. It was a good start to the trip because like you asked me earlier about expectations and stuff. Obviously, I was feeling a little bit of responsibility and pressure to represent AUPE when I was there, and doing that was at least one thing I'd done, and I could continue on. So it was a good start, and like I said, it was pretty inspiring to be received so well there.
Governor Walker was using the attacks on the unions to try and so-called balance his budget, because we all know the worldwide recession hit local governments and provincial and federal governments extremely hard in terms of the monies that they were bringing in. What workers realize, and they know, instinctively know, that crisis was created on Wall Street and in financial institutions across the world, whereby bankers and corporations were making huge amounts of profits, at the same time putting worldwide economies at extreme risk. And when those economies fell and those bankers and the corporations were bought out by governments, it meant there was huge deficits as a result. Now we've seen this, that the spin that some governments are putting on it, that the reason there was a deficit and a financial crisis was because of these overpaid public sector workers. It's absolutely not true. It's false, but we've seen it before where they use a crisis to try and ratchet back further the gains that working people have made. And Governor Walker's bill was exactly that. Use a crisis situation to try and bust the unions even more.
It was nonstop from the day we got there as far as pace goes, for us. But we met with Jason Seidner, and he'd been working. I don't think he'd had a day off in weeks. He was exhausted. He'd been working on this, 16-hour days, 20-hour days, maybe sometimes. And he described it as building a plane. Putting a plane together at 40,000 feet, and that's where he described how fast things were progressing, and how they just had to kind of fly by the seat of their pants and continue to do whatever it took to get the job done.
The interesting things to me was the people we were talking to. A lot of them had absolutely no direct connection to the public sector unions. Many of them were just out there in support. One of the groups that we ran into were firefighters. The firefighters unions were out there, and it's important to note that emergency responders were not part of this legislation. They got to keep their benefits, they got to keep their collective bargaining rights. But the firefighters felt that this was such an injustice that they came out as well.
So the protests and the occupation continued throughout the night, and by Thursday morning there was a large gathering outside of the Capitol building.
The firefighters marched in kind of in rank and to the top of the steps, and the president of the Firefighters Union, he let people know that on their way over there they'd passed a group of AFSCME employees that were protesting out in front of M&I Bank.
M&I Bank executives have been large supporters of Scott Walker. The firefighters did not appreciate that, and some of them started to realize then that, well, if we've got money there, why don't we do something about this? Why don't we, what they call, move our money?
M&I Bank is one of Scott Walker's biggest supporters, so we wanted to send a message, and send a very strong message. Withdrawal of $182,000 from M&I Bank.
Who did that?
One of the employed firefighters. His life savings for his retirement, he's moved it to another bank. That's the kind of action that needs to be taken. That's the kind of money that needs to be dried up for the attack on the working men and women of Wisconsin. Their life savings will go to businesses and banks that support them instead of the ones that are looking to destroy the working men and women of Wisconsin. This is the movement. This is where we're going. I hope everybody's with us.
The bankers panicked and actually closed some of those branches that afternoon, and we heard that that up to $600,000 had been removed from M&I Bank as a result of that within that period that we were there.
So that was another thing that they figured out they could do to create change, and obviously it worked.
Firstly, again, as I said, there was no media coverage at all, right? I'm new to Twitter, but I was hooked on it because, I mean, that was where we were getting this information, and it's very clear that the information about what was happening in Wisconsin was spread through social media. It showed the real power of that kind of connection at that level on an individual basis, spread across millions of people.
And one of the ways social media was used by the organizers is tied into the Ian's Pizza story. In the middle of the occupation, one of the organizers grabbed the megaphone and urged everyone inside the Capitol to get on their phones, to text message, to get on Facebook, to go on Twitter, and to let everyone know that this occupation is ongoing, that the people inside need food, and Ian's Pizza down the street would deliver if you contacted them and paid for pizza to be delivered to the people in Wisconsin.
They actually had a big chalkboard set up behind the counter there, and they had all the countries listed that they'd received orders for the people there, the protesters, from each listing all the countries, and there was a lot of countries there that you wouldn't even think of that would be donating pizzas to the cause.
And so the response was global throughout the United States, in Canada, in Egypt, China, and anywhere you can think of. People were responding to this and supporting what was happening in Wisconsin.
Dozens and dozens of countries. It was neat, and they sold T-shirts, and one of the T-shirts they sold had the silhouette of a pizza on it, and underneath it said, "This is what democracy tastes like." And I thought that was kind of a cute play on what they were contributing to the cause and their role in it.
So the organizers of this entire movement, they knew that they had to get a clear message. They had to explain to all the voters and all the taxpayers in Wisconsin that this was not just an attack on public sector unions. And their message was very simple and very clear. This is big government taking away ordinary people's rights.
Well, the messaging was great because it hit on fundamental issues. I think that a lot of the population, resonates with them. And the message was it's about freedom, and it's about big government taking away fundamental rights for ordinary people. And I think that you'll find that kind of message, resonates within American society and societies around the world. That yes, we need government to provide services to the people. They should be there to support people in their communities, but they should not be used as a tool by big business and corporations to fundamentally take away basic human rights, one of which is union rights. So that message, I think, resonated loud and clear, and what our delegation saw in Wisconsin was the outpouring of support from ordinary folks who weren't even closely connected to the unions that were in direct struggle.
The message was that, it's the citizens and the people that actually built Wisconsin. They're the people that vote for the politicians in Wisconsin. The government should be serving the people of Wisconsin and not serving big business. Big business doesn't elect governments. Big business didn't build the state. And I think that was the main message, and I think that's the message that connected with people and people agreed with.
So we were trying to stay on top of the developments that were happening there, and again, the timing of when we sent the delegation down was based on what we were being told by the leaders and the organizers that were down there. And when the delegation did make it down there, I was in touch with Brother Glenn Scott, just to see how things were going, and I heard pretty soon when they were down there that this bill had actually been rammed through.
We received a call from President Smith, I believe it was Friday morning, late morning, and he sounded a bit discouraged on the other end of the line, asking us, it's over, is it over? When are you guys coming home? And we told him, we said, it's not over.
I think that really speaks to our experiences on the ground, because I knew that it wasn't over, that people there were still upset, they were angry with what was happening, and the fight would continue. There was some spirits drained when we knew the bill had passed. But people knew it wasn't just about the bill now. It was about the people that were in power and opposing them.
Behind the scenes, what they were doing is they already knew that the bill had passed, and they were doing things to, what's the next step?
At this point, the organizers began to focus on their long game. They began launching recall campaigns against Republican senators.
In Wisconsin, you can recall politicians if they've been in power for a year, so the Democrats shifted their focus to recall drives to take control of the Senate again and prevent any further bad legislation from passing.
They also began to work very heavily on an election that is normally a very obscure election to the state Supreme Court, which was at that point weighted in favor of Republicans.
So we knew by Friday that the bill had passed now in the Senate on Wednesday and the Assembly on Thursday, and all that had to happen was for Scott Walker to sign it at this point, and it would be a done deal.
So it lined everything up quite well for the next day, which was Saturday, obviously, and that was kind of the day of the big protest. And I don't think that what was happening and the way things progressed actually changed, the amount of people that showed up. I think it actually got more people out. And, because I think until people always are willing to really accept things until it's a done deal. And obviously by Friday it seemed like a fairly done deal. So I think it did help the cause Saturday morning when the farmers rolled in.
Saturday was the big day. It was the day after Walker signed the bill, and the organizers were quite frankly very worried that the protests would lose steam and they wouldn't get a very big turnout at the rally.
We got up and we left the hotel, and it was early in the morning, so it was relatively quiet.
We walked down State Street, and it was pretty clear by the time we got towards the Capitol that there was already a lot of people there, and you could see the crowds of people backing up into the side streets. And shortly after we got there, the tractors started to roll in, and farmers usually don't get too involved in politics, but they were definitely, they showed up there that morning, and they showed up with, I don't know how many tractors there were, I didn't count them, but there was a lot of them. They all had signs on them. They were signs of displeasure, and they had their families in the tractors, and they were very well received. And it was something I'd never seen before at a rally, and it was good.
The folks with the Autonomous Solidarity Organization, they had the People's Mic set up yet again, and Glenn actually brought greetings from our union to the crowd that had assembled thus far. People really appreciated hearing from us once again.
Please take heart in the fact that your members are not alone in this fight. Millions of working people across this continent are contributing financially, while others are attending rallies of support. They want to help any way we can. Organizers, so we can carry on the fight back home. On behalf of all of our membership, please accept my thanks and admiration for your courage, strength, and conviction in the struggle for the dignity and rights of working people.
We were invited to take part in a march with the firefighters, actually. It was quite the honor. So we made our way through the swarming crowds to the firefighters' hall, where we met with them, and Jesse Jackson, Susan Sarandon, and Tony Shalhoub, some celebrities had showed up to lend their support.
But it was very interesting to note that they were not prominently featured. They were just members of the crowd. They were there to show their support for the average citizens of Wisconsin.
But front and center were the firefighters in this march that we got to proceed to the Capitol building with. And the crowd that assembled was so large that even the firefighters were stopped on their way to the building, and there were points where you just couldn't move because the crowd was so large.
The whole day was just one big crescendo. People continued to come. They were streaming in from all points. By the time the rally actually began, I could barely move. I was out in the streets, and I had to just weave my way around people, and I completely lost my cohorts somewhere in the crowds.
It was full. I mean, I don't think they could have got any more people out there. It was packed. There was people in trees. They had a crane up there. It was full. I don't think you could squeeze many more people in there.
So there was talk leading up to the protest on Saturday that the senators were slated to return. With the bill voted on, they didn't need to be in hiding anymore. And when they were finally introduced to the massive crowd, the outpouring was just fantastic. It was a hero's welcome.
And they inspired a movement. So join me and my assembly colleagues, and let's welcome home the Wisconsin 14.
When they were introduced to this gigantic crowd, the crowd erupted into cheers. They were their heroes for taking such a bold move.
So was it over?
No, it wasn't over. And that's, kind of the message, right? The message was it's not over. They were giving instruction to all the people at the rally on the things they could do to continue to push back and make change. And, I think those people got the message. And, they all have families, they all have friends, but no, it wasn't over.
Just because Scott Walker undemocratically and against the will of the people forced this through doesn't mean that people have lost their voice. In fact, their voice got even stronger. And they showed up in hundreds of thousands. And I remember Glenn over the phone telling me he's never felt anything like what he felt when he heard 100,000 people singing Solidarity Forever. And that's something that you live with forever. You never forget that kind of experience.
Hearing, 100,000 people singing Solidarity Forever, that's very moving, that's very powerful. But, just to see that amount of people out there and the passion and the knowledge too. I mean, you walk down State Street and there was signs on the majority of the stores supporting this. We walked through a couple of times through suburban, neighborhoods, and people had signs in their windows of their houses supporting this. So, I mean, that was the message, and they got the message out, and people were supporting the message. I've never seen anything like it before. I hope I see it again someday, because it was great to see. And hopefully there's never the need to do it, but if there is a need, I would love to see something like that happen again. Absolutely.
I'm jealous of him that he experienced that, but good on him. And good on AUPE for making sure we were physically there and able to experience that and to learn from it and to bring that message back. But if nothing else, it woke up not just the labor movement, but it woke up society in that state to say, watch out, because this is what a government can do to fundamental basic human rights.
It was very inspiring because these people didn't give up. It's very easy. I've been to a lot of rallies where, you go out there and you give it really hard for an hour, and then at the end of the hour you pack up and you go home and you feel good and you think you did your job. But these people kept at it for days and weeks, and sometimes that's what it takes. But you know what? At the end of those days and those weeks, they did create change, and they did send a strong message to the government, and I think they probably sent a strong message to other governments that if they attempt to do this, they can expect the same kind of reaction, and even that may be a deterrent.
It was an incredible experience to be there amongst all of that. Typically, when you go to a union rally or maybe even wear a union pin in public in Alberta, you might get a bit of a weird look from some of the people. But in Madison, if anyone caught you wearing an Ask Me sticker on your jacket or carrying a union flag, you were a hero, and people understood that and they recognized that. And I think that they've done just a fantastic job in rallying the public behind their cause there. I'm quite concerned that something like what Scott Walker has done can come to Alberta, and I'm glad AUPE was there and that we can bring this back and be prepared for it if it happens here.
The danger here is if public sector unions are broken in Wisconsin, that is a green light for anyone who wants, any politician anywhere in North America who wants to break public sector unions and erode the rights of middle-class people.
I think we need to be prepared, we need to be ready for these kind of measures to be brought into Alberta. There are the same kind of political elements in Alberta that exist, well, around the world, but exist in Wisconsin as well. And I'm talking about the kind of politicians who would like to see the end of unions. They'd like to see the end of the influence that unions have in the political environment. They'd like to see the end to the kind of resistance that unions put up to unfettered capitalism and unfettered free market policies where the rule of profit is the only rule of the land. So yes, of course there's elements in Alberta, and there's high-profile politicians in this province that fundamentally believe that. So I know they were watching what was going in Wisconsin just like we were. And yes, we need to be prepared in case any such legislation makes its way into this province. And I think we use the experience of Wisconsin and what we learned there to build our readiness and our preparedness to stand very strong as a union, and not stand alone as AUPE, but stand united with unions across this province, public and private sector unions, to do whatever we need to do to prevent that kind of bill being passed in this province. Because it means if we are unsuccessful in that, if a bill comes along, much like it has in Wisconsin and in other states, it's the end of AUPE as we know it.